There was a lawyer in the city, known for his ruthless ways. His name was Richard Cole, and he was feared by everyone who had to face him in a courtroom. He had a reputation for winning no matter what. He wasn't just a good lawyer, he was the best, and that came with a dark side. His clients trusted him because he never lost, but it wasn't because he was fair, it was because he would do anything, even cross the line, to get the job done. Richard was known for his sharp tongue. He didn't care about making friends, only about making sure he got ahead. He could tear apart anyone who stood in his way, using their weaknesses against them. Whether it was making someone cry on the stand or humiliating a witness in front of the jury, Richard's methods were as cold as ice. His arrogance was unmatched. He believed that everyone who crossed his path was beneath him. It didn't matter who you were, he always had a way to make you feel small. People dreaded facing him in court. They would do anything to avoid it, because they knew what Richard could do to them. He wasn't just a lawyer, he was a monster in a suit, using the law as a weapon. His clients respected him, but they also feared him. Richard didn't care about their feelings, all he cared about was winning, and he'd do whatever it took to make that happen. Then, one day a man walked into Richard Cole's life who would change everything. His name was Samuel L. Jackson, a legendary actor known for his tough no-nonsense persona on screen. But Samuel wasn't just another celebrity, he was someone who had built a career on being strong, direct and confident. His name alone commanded respect. You didn't just mock Samuel L. Jackson, not without consequences. Richard, as usual, was confident. He had no idea who he was about to face. He thought of Samuel as just another famous person who wouldn't know how to deal with someone like him in a professional setting. Richard had handled important people before, and he always knew how to make them feel small. Samuel, though, was different. The two were scheduled to meet for a legal case, nothing special to Richard. It was a regular day, another case to win. As Samuel walked into the room, the energy shifted. People noticed it immediately, even if Richard didn't. Samuel wasn't the kind of person who had to speak loudly to get attention. He had a presence, and it was enough to silence the room. Richard didn't show any signs of fear, of course. He saw Samuel as just another challenge. He smirked, sitting back in his chair, sizing him up. Samuel, on the other hand, seemed unfazed. He wasn't here to prove something to Richard, he was just here to get things done. But the moment Richard opened his mouth, things began to change. Richard, with his usual arrogance, decided to mock Samuel in front of everyone. He thought it would be easy, like always. He believed that by putting Samuel down, he'd look even more powerful. After all, how could a movie star stand up to a lawyer like him? Richard smirked, ready to strike. But little did he know, he was about to make a mistake he'd regret forever. Richard leaned back in his chair, his eyes glinting with arrogance. He had always been the one in control, and he wasn't about to let this actor, no matter how famous, get away with anything. With a smug grin, he started to mock Samuel, his words cutting through the silence of the room. Must be nice to live in a world where all you do is pretend to be someone else. Must be easy to get by when you're paid to act tough, Richard said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. But in here, in the real world, it's all about the law, and trust me, this is one game you don't want to play with me. Everyone in the room waited for Samuel's response, the tension thick in the air. They knew Richard was trying to make him look small, trying to push him into a corner. Richard was used to seeing people shrink back when he belittled them. He had broken so many people down with just his words alone, and he expected the same result here. But Samuel L. Jackson didn't react the way Richard thought he would. He didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice. Instead, he sat there, calm and collected. His eyes locked on Richard. It was as if Richard's words didn't even matter. Samuel was just watching him, his expression unreadable. Richard pressed on, sensing that his first jab hadn't done the job. I guess this is just another one of those cases where you get to walk in, say a few lines and get paid millions, huh? I've spent my whole life learning how to win, not pretending to be someone I'm not. You might be a star on the big screen, but here, in the real world, you're nothing. Still, Samuel didn't say a word. He simply leaned forward slightly, eyes never leaving Richard's. The silence between them grew heavier, and Richard felt a strange discomfort creeping in. He was used to having control, to making others uncomfortable with his words. But now, in front of this man, the usual power he held seemed to slip away. Richard's confidence began to waver, but he refused to back down. "You know, I could destroy your whole career if I wanted to," Richard continued, his voice low and threatening. "One wrong move, one bad decision, and I'll make sure you never work again." But still, Samuel said nothing. He wasn't angry, he wasn't upset, he was simply waiting for Richard to realize he had made a huge mistake. Waiting for the moment when the power would shift, and Richard would learn that there was more to strength than just words. Samuel had something Richard could never understand: self-control, and the ability to remain calm in the face of a storm. Richard's arrogance was starting to crack, he could feel it. It was subtle at first, just a shift in the air, a feeling of unease he couldn't quite shake. Samuel wasn't backing down, wasn't even reacting the way people usually did when Richard tried to intimidate them. For the first time in a long time, Richard felt uncertain. He tried to ignore it. He'd always prided himself on being unshakable, but the silence in the room was growing louder. Every eye was on Samuel, waiting to see what he would do. Richard, still determined to maintain control, cleared his throat and straightened up in his chair, hoping that he could regain his composure. "So, what's it going to be, Samuel?" Richard said, his voice tinged with impatience. "You just going to sit there and let me talk? Is that your big move? Let me tell you, it won't work. I've dealt with men 10 times tougher than you, and they all crumbled under pressure. You're not special." But Samuel didn't flinch, he didn't even blink. It was like Richard's words didn't reach him at all. Samuel slowly leaned forward, his calm eyes now focused on Richard with an intensity that sent a chill through the lawyer's spine. It was a look that wasn't just about physical presence, it was a look that said he knew something Richard didn't. Richard paused for a moment, unsure how to respond. This was the part where people either broke down or fought back. But Samuel wasn't doing either. Instead, Samuel opened his mouth, and when he spoke, his voice was steady, almost quiet. "You really don't get it, do you?" Samuel's words were simple, but they hit harder than anything Richard had ever said. "You think you can break me with your words, with your threats? You're wrong." Richard was taken aback. For the first time he didn't know what to say. His mouth went dry, and a bead of sweat formed on his forehead. He had never seen someone so calm under pressure. It wasn't just confidence, it was a deep, unshakable belief in himself, something Richard had never truly understood. Samuel continued, his voice now carrying more weight. "I've spent my life standing up in front of people, on screen, off screen, wherever. I've faced much worse than you. And the thing is, you're nothing but a bully hiding behind a suit and a briefcase. You think that makes you strong? Nah, it makes you weak. The real strength comes from knowing when to stay calm and not let people like you get to me." The room was dead silent. Richard couldn't believe what he was hearing. The mockery he had tried to use against Samuel had backfired. Now, he was the one on the defensive, and he didn't know how to handle it. Samuel's words weren't loud, but they were powerful. They cut through Richard's defenses like a knife. Richard, who had spent his whole life making others feel small, now found himself the one shrinking back. For the first time in a long time, Richard realized that there was more to power than intimidation. It wasn't about who could talk the loudest or threaten the most, it was about who could stand strong when the world was trying to break them. Samuel had just flipped the script. The ruthless lawyer, who had once felt untouchable, was now the one who was rattled. The room remained silent, the tension almost unbearable. Richard tried to recover, but his words seemed to be stuck in his throat. Samuel had taken control without raising his voice, without using the aggressive tactics Richard was so familiar with. It wasn't just a comeback, it was a complete shift in power. Richard, the man who had always been the one to hold people in the palm of his hand, was now the one struggling to regain his footing. The look in Samuel's eyes had changed everything. Richard could feel the weight of the moment pressing on him, and it terrified him. Samuel stood up slowly, his movements deliberate and calm. He didn't rush, didn't act out of anger, he simply walked over to the window, his back to Richard, and looked out at the city. The coolness in the room was now almost suffocating, and Richard couldn't shake the feeling that he was losing control of everything. Samuel's voice broke the silence once again, this time with a quiet strength that made everyone hang on to his every word. "You think you're the only one who's ever had to fight for what they want? You think you're the only one who's ever had to deal with tough situations? I've had people doubt me, my entire life. They said I wasn't good enough, they said I'd never make it. But here I am, still standing, and I didn't get here by trying to tear others down. I got here by believing in myself, by staying true to who I am. Richard stood frozen, unable to respond. It wasn't just Samuel's words, it was the way he carried himself, the way he owned every single word. Samuel wasn't just a man of words, he was a man of action, and in that moment, Richard realized he had made the biggest mistake of his life by underestimating him. Samuel turned back around, locking eyes with Richard, who was now visibly shaken. I don't need to prove anything to you, Samuel said calmly, but I'll tell you this, you don't intimidate me. You never did. Richard's mind raced. He was the one who had made others quiver in fear, who had crushed people's spirits with his sharp tongue, and now here he was, feeling small, vulnerable, and defeated. He had never expected to be in this position, especially not against someone like Samuel L. Jackson. Samuel's words were like a challenge, but they weren't meant to hurt, they were meant to teach. In that moment, he had done what Richard could never do. He had shown strength through restraint, power through peace. It was a lesson Richard would never forget. The room felt different now, the power was no longer in Richard's hands, it was in Samuel's, and everyone knew it. The silence that followed Samuel's words was deafening. Richard, once the untouchable lawyer, who had ruled every room he walked into, was left standing there, stunned. He had no words. No response. The confidence he had carried for years was shattered in an instant. Everyone in the room could see it, the change in the air, the shift in power. Samuel L. Jackson had made his point, and he had done it without raising his voice, or even breaking a sweat. Richard's reputation as the ruthless lawyer was no longer the same. Over the next few weeks, word of what had happened spread like wildfire. People talked about it in hushed tones, but no one dared to challenge Samuel after that day. Even the most intimidating lawyers started to question their own methods. No one had ever seen someone turn the tables so effortlessly. Richard tried to regain his standing, tried to assert his dominance once again, but the truth was, something had changed. He couldn't intimidate like he once had. Samuel's legendary moment had exposed the weakness beneath Richard's tough exterior, and while Richard's career would continue, it would never be the same. He would always remember the day he underestimated Samuel L. Jackson, a lesson he would never forget.